Snow pressed against the windows of the 7 Corps headquarters, the wind scraping across the glass in uneven bursts. Lamps flickered along the long table where maps lay pinned under metal clips. The air carried the sound of distant artillery, muffled by the storm rolling over the Ardennes. Lawton Collins stood at the center of the room with his gloves tucked into his belt and his cap resting on the table beside him. He leaned over the map spread open before him, tracing the ridgelines east of Bastogne with the back of his hand. Officers moved in and out through the side doors, carrying folders, field notes, and radio transcripts stained by melted snow. The door opened again. A young major stepped inside with a dispatch folder held tight against his chest. "General," he said, "message from 3rd Army." Collins looked up. "From Patton?" "Yes, sir." Marked urgent. Collins held out his hand. The major placed a folder in it and stepped back. A gust of wind pushed into the room before the door closed again. Collins opened the folder. The message inside was short, typed on a thin sheet buckled by moisture. He read it once. Then again. The officers nearby paused their work. Collins laid the paper flat on the map so everyone could see the single clear statement. 3rd Army turning north immediately. All available forces moving. Patton. Silence settled over the table. A pencil rolled across the wood and fell to the floor. Collins straightened. His eyes followed the map from the southern edge of Luxembourg up toward the white circle drawn around Bastogne. The arc of Patton's movement cut across the entire board, slicing through roads already strained by freezing rain. He pressed his thumb against the map and spoke quietly. "He's turning them in this storm." Colonel Maddox stepped closer. "Sir, that terrain is locked down. Ice from here to Dykirch. Bridges unstable. Visibility near zero." Collins kept his hand on the map. "And he's still moving." Another officer approached with a radio transcript. "General, our forward observers report worsening conditions. Winds shifting west. Mud under the snow. Vehicles sliding off embankments." Collins took the paper, but didn't read it. His focus stayed on the line Patton intended to carve north. A second message arrived from the communications tent outside. The captain who delivered it shook snow from his shoulders before speaking. "General Collins, 3rd Army liaison confirms the movement has already begun. Columns are rolling." Collins looked at him. "Already?" "Yes, sir," before the first message reached us. Collins walked around the table, stopping at the far corner, where a stack of reconnaissance photos lay half-covered by a field jacket. He pulled the top one free. It showed a frozen road running between dark pines, the sky above it clouded and heavy. He set the photo beside Patton's message. Maddox spoke from the opposite side of the table. "If he angles north that fast, he'll need every open route. That puts pressure on our sector. Ammo dumps, fuel lines, medical stations. Everything shifts." Another officer added, "And if the Germans punch again toward the west, they will," Collins said. He lifted Patton's message again, studying the crisp black letters. He folded the paper once and slipped it into his breast pocket. A rumble echoed from outside as supply trucks moved through the compound. Snow clung to their tires. Men shouted orders through the wind. Collins stepped toward the window. The storm blurred the headlights of the vehicles, turning them into moving patches of white. He tapped the glass with 2 fingers, tracking the faint glow of a convoy leaving the camp. "He's betting everything on the turn," Collins said. Maddox answered softly. "He usually does." Collins put on his gloves. "Get the Corps Operations officers in here. I want current status on all roads between us and the Luxembourg line. I want fuel reports, engineer positions, bridge conditions. No delays." "Yes, sir." "And bring in the liaison to 1st Army. I want them updated immediately." The men hurried out. Collins remained at the window, listening to the wind strike the frame. He adjusted his collar and looked back at the map table. The circle around Bastogne glowed under the lamplight. Another officer entered. "General, message from 8th Corps. They request our estimate on possible reinforcement corridors in case German armor pushes west again." Collins gestured toward the map. "Tell them we'll send updated projections once we confirm 3rd Army's new axis. And tell them to hold." "Yes, sir." The officer left. Collins returned the map and lowered himself into the chair at the head of the table. He examined the Southern Road network again, imagining Patton's armor grinding through ice and slush. Engines strained under the weight of the storm. A faint tremor passed through the building as more artillery sounded in the distance. The door opened once more. Maddox re-entered with fresh reports and a group of officers behind him. "All right," Collins said. "Let's lay it out. Patton's already in motion. That changes everything along our boundary. We adjust now." He reached for a pencil and drew a single line north from the 3rd Army sector, the mark cutting to the layered maps until it reached the outskirts of Bastogne. He set the pencil down and looked around the room. "No one moves alone," he said. "If 3rd Army is turning north in this weather, we support the shift. Every step." The storm outside hammered the roof as the officers leaned in, the lamps flickering over their faces and the map between them. Snow pushes against the canvas walls of the operations tent. Lamps hiss overhead. Papers tremble on the map table as another gust slams the structure. Collins tightens the straps of his field jacket and leans over the main regional map, tracing the roads north of Luxembourg with one gloved finger. An aide pushes inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Message from 3rd Army headquarters," he says. Collins nods. "Hand it here." The aide passes a folded sheet and steps back. Collins opens it slowly, reading through the brief, clipped lines. The storm rattles the poles of the tent while he scans the coordinates, the new timetable, the repositioned armor columns, the speed of the pivot. He lowers the paper. Patton's pushing faster than predicted. The aide glances at the map. He's already moving the leading elements. He's turning the entire army north. Not tomorrow. Now. Collins moves a marker east of the Sour River. These units were preparing to advance toward the Saar. He's pulling them out of their assembly areas in the middle of this weather. Another officer enters with more reports under his arm. "General, traffic from 1st Army confirms enemy pressure increasing along the northern gap. They expect the line to buckle before nightfall, unless reinforcements arrive." Collins studies the intersections leading toward Bastogne, his eyes shifting across the tangle of roads half blocked by snow. Did they specify where they want us? "They're asking if we can shorten our flank and prepare a blocking line here." The officer sets his finger on a ridge south of the threatened sector. "And if Patton makes it there first?" Collins asks quietly. No one answers. He steps away from the table and walks to the tent's opening. Snow drifts sideways across the camp. Truck engines cough in the distance. Men move through the wind, their silhouettes blurred by blowing ice. Collins turns back. "Get me radio contact with 3rd Army's liaison." The communications sergeant adjusts the set on a smaller table. Static fills the tent. The sergeant turns a dial until a voice breaks through the noise. "Repeat, 3rd Army spearheads advancing despite road obstruction. Weather slowing everything. Convoy stalled near Mersch." Collins steps closer. "This is 7 Corps. I need confirmation from 3rd Army on the status of the northern pivot. Is the timetable intact?" More static. The operator tries again. "Intact, column still moving. General Patton, order continuous advance." Collins exchanges a look with his officers. The sergeant raises the volume. He said no pause for conditions. If armor can't keep the pace, infantry will push ahead on foot. Collins lowers his chin. He turns the radio down with one quick motion. "Understood." The wind batters the tent again. One of the lanterns flickers, but holds. An intelligence officer clears his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, if 3rd Army reaches those crossroads first, the entire sector will shift. Responsibility for the relief corridor could change hands." Collins walks back to the table and moves the American markers again, repositioning the labels for 7 Corps. "Then we adjust. But we don't collapse our flank for the sake of chasing coordination on paper. We hold what we're responsible for." A runner bursts through the tent flaps with fresh dispatches. His face is red from the cold. "General Collins, reports from the front. Enemy armor is pushing west along Route N15. Units are falling back through the woods. They say the storm is covering the movement." Collins takes a dispatch and reads it silently. Any sign of them regrouping? No, sir. They're scattered along the tree line. He sets the paper down. Signal all sector commanders. No independent withdrawals. They hold on the designated line until direct order. The runner nods and exits. Silence falls over the tent, except for the wind pressing against the fabric. One officer shifts uneasily. Sir, if Patton breaks through first and reaches a pocket from the southeast, the pressure will shift toward our boundary. Coordination might become, he searches for a word, complicated. Collins straightens. Complicated is acceptable. Losing ground is not. He folds a message from Patton's headquarters and slips it into his jacket. When he speaks again, his voice stays calm. Prepare alternate defense lines along the parallel ridges. If 3rd Army opens a corridor early, we'll pivot to support the northern shoulder. Until then, no speculation. A captain brings over another map, this one showing road grades and elevation. He places it gently on the table. General, many of the roads leading north are iced over. Heavy equipment from both armies is going to choke every pass. If Patton forces a push through these valleys, traffic will lock for miles. Collins studies a chart. He knows that. Yes, sir. He'll push anyway. The captain gives a silent nod. A gust lifts one side of the tent wall. Snow sprays inside. Collins steps over and pulls the rope tighter, securing the canvas to the wooden stake. His gloves stiffen from the cold. He pauses, watching the move of the men outside as they load crates into a half-track under the storm. Another officer approaches from behind. Sir, should we slow our own repositioning until we know the exact speed of 3rd Army's advance? Collins keeps his eyes on the swirling snow. No, we move exactly as planned. We don't chase what we can't control. He returns to the map table and makes several notes beside the ridge positions. The officers watch quietly, waiting for the next order. Shift our artillery observers to higher ground, he says. Not all of them. Only enough to cover the open sectors. If Patton's armor appears on the eastern approach, I want their movements visible. Understood. And clear the service road behind the second line. I want a clean path for reinforcements. A moment passes before another officer speaks softly. General, do we coordinate directly with Patton if his units enter our zone? Collins stops writing. We coordinate as required, but we will not rely on his timing. The officer nods and steps back. The tent door opens again, this time with Major Keene entering, shaking snow off his helmet. General Collins, we have updated reconnaissance photos from aerial missions before the weather closed in. He opens a folder and spreads several grainy images across the table. These positions here, enemy armor retreating southwest. But here, he points to another photo. They're reinforcing the northern woods. Something is pulling them in that direction. Patton, Collins says. Keene nods. Looks that way. Collins studies the photos, moving them slightly to align with the map. They're reacting to him faster than they're reacting to us. The lamps flicker again as the storm tightens around the camp. Collins presses his palm against the table, scanning the broad arc of roads spiraling toward the contested pocket. Another aide steps in. General, Headquarters is asking for an updated estimate on when 7 Corps can reposition for the northern defense line. Collins checks the clock hanging from one of the tent poles. Tell them 6 hours. Even if the roads slow us, we'll reach the holding points by then. Yes, sir. And ask them if they received any fresh signals from 3rd Army's forward command posts. The aide nods and exits. Collins rubs his hands together, warming them near one of the lanterns. The firelight throws moving shadows across the map surface. Keene watches him closely. Sir, do you believe Patton can keep the pace he's setting? Collins looks at him. He'll reach whoever needs him, Collins says. The question is who reaches their line first. Keene nods. Collins steps back on the table, shoulders square, eyes fixed on the shifting markers of the battlefield laid open before him. Keep sending updates to all divisions, he says. Tell them the situation is changing fast. Tell them to be ready for anything. Outside, engines roar to life. Headlights cut through the storm as convoys pull out of the camp, forming strained lines against the darkening sky. Inside the tent, Collins remains still, studying the northern sectors with unwavering focus, while the storm buries the camp in sheets of white. Wind sweeps through the gaps between the command tents, carrying loose snow across the frozen ground. Lanterns tremble on their hooks. Collins steps out of his main operations tent and walks toward the smaller communications shelter, boots sinking into the accumulating drifts. Inside, radios crackle under storm. Operators sit hunched over their sets, headphones pressed tight. A large map lies pinned against the inner wall, edges fluttering as the canvas shakes. A sergeant stands when Collins enters. "General, new traffic from 3rd Army Liaison. It just came through." Collins removes his gloves and takes the message. He holds it close to a lantern and reads it line by line. The storm hums against the canvas while the words sink in. He lowers the paper. "They're accelerating again," he says, "even in this weather." The sergeant nods. "Reports say their forward elements are pushing through fields on foot. Tanks are bogging down." Collins looks at the radio operators. "Try to raise their forward command post. I want direct confirmation." The sergeant signals, and 2 operators begin adjusting dials. Static rolls through the tent in slow waves. A dim signal breaks through. 3rd Army advance continuing. Infantry ahead of armor visibility near 0. Collins leans forward. "This is 7 Corps. I need confirmation on your northern axis. Are you maintaining the projected course?" More static. The operator fine-tunes the frequency. "Maintaining." General Patton orders no deviation. "Pushing until contact." The line fades again. Collins steps back, breathing out slowly. He turns toward the map, tracing the faint roads that twist toward the pocket. The storm-darkened lantern light throws wavering shadows over the grid of villages and ridges. Major Keene enters, brushing snow from his coat. "Sir, enemy patrols hit the northern flank again. Small units, but coordinated. They're testing our outer line." "Any penetrations?" Collins asks. "None." Keene approaches the map, but they're getting closer. They know we're repositioning. Collins studies the symbols marking their divisions. "What about the roads?" "Worse by the hour. Snowdrift blocking sections west of Edelbruck. Some vehicles are stuck, and engineers are clearing them one at a time." Collins scans the map again. "If Patton reaches these ridges before we secure the northern line, pressure will shift to our boundary. He'll pull the enemy toward him. We'll need to compensate immediately." Keene nods. "Our men are ready, but the storm's slowing everything." Collins lifts his collar and turns back toward the entrance. "Come with me." They step outside. The storm swirls thick around the camp. Trucks rumble in the distance, their lights blurred by blowing ice. Soldiers move between tents, bent against the wind. Collins walks toward a snow-covered command vehicle parked near the edge of the camp. A driver opens a door for him. Collins climbs in. Keene sits beside him. "Take us to the forward ridge," Collins says. The engine groans as the vehicle pushes through the drifts, headlights slicing through the storm. Trees sway along the roadside. Snow pulses across the windshield in long streaks. They reach an outpost near the base of a ridge. Infantrymen stand near barricades of sandbags and snow-covered crates. One of them salutes as Collins steps out. "General, we weren't expecting you." "I need to see the line," Collins says. The soldier leads them to a shallow trench reinforcing the ridge. Snow clings to helmets and rifles. Men shift behind machine gun nests, shielding their faces from the wind. Collins scans the forest. The ridgeline vanishes into sheets of white. No movement shows beyond the trees, only the faint sway of branches under the weight of snow. "Any activity?" he asks. "Scattered probing last night." The platoon leader answers. "Footprints. Quick contacts. Nothing heavy." Collins kneels and brushes snow from a map board the men have been using. "If 3rd Army reaches this valley before we're fully formed here, they'll push the enemy straight toward this ridge. You'll feel the pressure immediately." The platoon leader nods. "We'll hold, sir." Collins stands, watching the storm roll across the treetops. "Signal your artillery. Keep observers ready to relocate if visibility improves." Keene steps closer. "Sir, HQ will want an update. They'll have one, Collins says, but I'm not sending assumptions. They return to the vehicle. As the engine starts, Collins grips the handle near the door, staring out at the frozen landscape. Back at the main camp, officers gather near the operations tent as Collins approaches. They move aside, letting him through. He steps back to the central map table. Everyone waits. Collins places both hands on the edges of the table. The line holds, but enemy pressure is coordinated. They're adjusting to Patton's movement faster than expected. One officer swallows. Should we slow our redeployment? Wait for a clearer picture from Third Army. Collins straightens. No. If we slow, we lose the initiative. We move according to our own timetable. Keene adds, engineers say the roads north will be partially cleared within the next 2 hours. Enough for supply convoys. Good, Collins replies. Keep them moving. No pauses. An aide rushes in with fresh dispatches. General, message from 1st Army Headquarters. They want confirmation that 7 Corps can stabilize the northern route if 3rd Army breaks through earlier than predicted. Collins takes the message, reads it once, folds it tightly and sets it down. Tell them yes. The officers look at him. Collins continues, but also tell them we won't realign blindly to match 3rd Army's pace. If Patton opens a corridor ahead of schedule, we adjust, but we hold our responsibilities first. The aide nods and leaves. Snow drums heavily against the tent roof. A lantern flickers in the draft. Keene clears his throat. Sir, may I ask something? Collins gives a short nod. Do you think Patton understands how much this storm is slowing the entire front? Collins looks at the map again. He understands. He just won't slow down. Keene watches him carefully. Then what happens to us if he reaches a corridor while we're still forming the northern line? Collins shifts one marker slightly on the map. Then we move faster. He steps away and walks to the radio table. The operators look toward him. Ray's 7th Armored Division. Collins says, I want their latest position. Static. Wind. Then a faint voice. Convoys stalled, pushing through ice, maintaining direction. Collins leans in. Tell them reinforcements are on the way. And tell them to brace for shifting pressure if 3rd Army advances north of the trough. The operator relays the message. Collins turns to his officers. Prepare a contingency. If enemy forces pull away from our eastern flank to meet Patton, we counter immediately. No waiting for approval. Understood. The wind slams the north side of the tent. The canvas strains. Collins steps back to the center of the room and looks at every officer present. From this moment forward, no hesitation. We move with purpose. The storm won't decide the field for us. He takes the folded message from his pocket, the one reporting Patton's continued advance, and presses it flat on the map. We adapt, he says. The room stays still, every man watching him. Outside, engines start again. Troops move through the darkened camp. Snow continues to fall, burying the tracks behind them as 7 Corps prepares for the next phase of the fight. Snow drives sideways across the camp as Collins steps out of the operations tent. The storm has grown sharp enough to blur the shapes of trucks and men moving through the wind. Lanterns swing violently from their posts. Engines roar against the cold. Keene approaches with his collar pulled high. General, new reports are coming in fast. 3rd Army's forward elements are hitting the valley south of the ridge. They're closer than anyone expected. Collins nods once. Let's see it. They push through the storm and enter the command tent. The heat from the lanterns mixes with the icy draft sneaking through the seams. Officers cluster near the central map, tense, waiting. An aide hands Collins a radio log. Sir, these are the latest transmissions. 3rd Army reached the lower pass almost an hour ahead of estimate. Collins scans the notes. They're cutting through the snow on foot again. Yes, sir. Infantry moving in small teams. Tanks still far behind. Another officer steps forward. General, enemy reaction is violent. They're pulling units from the eastern woods to counter Patton's advance. Our scouts report armor turning north. Keene spreads a recon map over the table. Here, enemy forces redirecting toward the valleys. They're abandoning pressure on our right flank. Collins looks carefully at the shifting symbols. Voices rise around him as officers trade urgent updates. If they abandon the woods, our line might hold easier, but it will crush the northern slopes. Collins raises a hand. Silence spreads. He moves a few markers, aligning them with the observed movement. If Patton draws them south of the ridge, the pocket tightens here. That means heavier pressure on the corridor we're preparing. Keene nods. Should we reposition earlier? Collins studies the ridgeline. No, not until we confirm where the enemy commits fully. A radio operator calls out, "General, 3rd Army liaison on the line. Priority traffic." Collins walks quickly to the table. Patch it through. Static rattles, then clears enough for a strained voice. 7 Corps come in. 3rd Army pushing through the valley. Resistance heavy visibility impossible. Need confirmation on enemy movements north of your sector. Collins takes the microphone. This is Collins. Enemy units are pulling east and redirecting toward you. Expect armor along the ravine before nightfall. Understood. General Patton says press on. The line crackles and dies. Collins lowers the microphone. Keene watches him. They're going to hit the ravine hard. Yes, Collins says. A runner enters with snow crusted around his boots. Sir, reports from the ridge outpost. Enemy armor. Sighted moving toward the valley floor. Sound of heavy engines. They're shifting their main push. Collins steps to the map. He presses his finger against the ridge line, marking the forward infantry positions. They're trying to cut off Patton's lead elements. Keene scans the map. If they break through the ravine, they'll reach the corridor before 3rd Army. Collins looks sharply at him. Not if we hold this ridge. Another officer steps close. Sir, our northern units aren't fully set yet. The storm slowed them. They're still moving into position. Collins grips the edge of the table. Then we don't wait for a perfect formation. He turns toward the communication desk. Signal all division commanders. Immediate acceleration of the northern line. No delays. I want every man moving. The operator relays the order. Collins returns to the map. His officers watch as he recalculates positions in silence. The tent shakes as a gust slams against it. Snow blows through the brief opening in the entrance flap. A captain rushes in holding binoculars. General Collins, you need to step outside. Collins strides out of tent, followed by Keene and 2 officers. The storm swirls thick, but down the slope beyond the camp. Faint flashes of light pulse through the white curtain. Low booms drift up seconds later. That's artillery, Keene says. No, Collins replies. Listen again. Another boom, slightly different, sharper, shorter echo. Tank guns, Collins adds. Snow drive harder. Collins narrows his eyes, watching the horizon. A soldier from the observation post runs toward them. General, we have visual on 3rd Army flares south of the valley. Looks like they're signaling contact with enemy armor. Collins looks at him. How close? Close enough to shake the ground. Collins gives a single nod and heads back into the tent. His officers follow. Inside, he points at the ridge marker. Move the artillery line forward 100 yards. Even in this weather, we need them ready to fire blind. An officer hesitates. Sir, with visibility this low. Collins looks up. They fire when ordered. The officer nods and rushes off. The radios flare again. Heavy fire. 3rd Army pinned. Enemy armor attempting to break through. Collins steps closer. Identify your position. South of the ridge. Infantry holding. Tanks stalled. Request support fire from 7 Corps if possible. Collins answers instantly. You'll have it. He turns to his artillery coordinator. Prepare fire mission. All batteries aiming toward the ravine. When 3rd Army confirms their exact location, we adjust. Yes, sir. Keene moves beside him. If their infantry is this close, our northern line might collide with them. Collins examines a map, eyes on the thin margin between friendly and enemy markers. Then the line must be formed before the collision. The storm roars against the tent walls. A major enters, breathless. General, the outpost on the ridge is sending signals. They've spotted enemy armor climbing the slope. Collins steps toward him. Climbing? In this weather? Yes, sir. Slow but advancing. He turns sharply to the operators. Send the order. Ridge units hold at all costs. No retreat without my direct command. The order goes out. An explosion thunders in the distance, muffled by snow. Everyone freezes for a heartbeat. Keene looks at Collins. That sounded closer. It was. A second blast follows, then a third. The radio crackles violently. 7 Corps, 3rd Army, pushing, need your line to hold. Holding position, can't fall back. Collins grips the edge of the radio table. We're holding. Another explosion shakes the tent. Officers exchange alarmed glances as the faint glow of distant fire flickers through the canvas. Collins moves to the map and presses a marker firmly into the valley. They're coming straight up the ravine. They're trying to smash through before Patton's men link with us. Keene looks at him. Do we counterattack? No, Collins points to the ridge. We hold and let them exhaust themselves. Patton will break through from the south. The radio sputters again. Enemy tanks stalled. 3rd Army advancing. Contact imminent. Collins lifts his head. Prepare for breakthrough. The officers stand ready. A final distant explosion echoes across the frozen landscape. Then a faint, rising sound reaches the camp. Not the boom of artillery, not the churn of engines, but something else. A continuous rumble, growing stronger. Keene looks at Collins. General, is that... Collins steps toward the tent entrance. The sound grows louder, layered, rhythmic. He pulls open the flap. Through the storm, faint silhouettes move across the lower valley. Lines of men, advancing despite the blinding snow. Behind them, shapes of tanks, stalled but pushing forward inch by inch. Flares crackle overhead. An officer rushes out beside him. Sir, that's 3rd Army. Collins watches the ghost-like figures push through the white haze, closing the gap under enemy fire. Behind them, deeper flashes erupt along the ravine. The enemy trying desperately to stop the advance. Collins lifts his chin and turns to his men. They're breaking through. The storm rips across the camp as officers scatter to carry out their orders. Columns form in the snow. Engines roar to life. Artillery crews run to their posts. Infantry tighten their packs. Collins stands still for a moment, staring into the valley where Patton's men push relentlessly toward the ridge. The battlefield is shifting, fast, violently, and 7 Corps is about to meet the full weight of it. Snow presses against the windows of Collins's forward command post. The lamps flicker as officers move charts aside, clearing a long wooden table crowded with empty mugs and spent pencils. Radios pulse with scattered voices, each one carrying reports of exhausted men clawing forward across ridges swallowed by winter. A Jeep engine cuts outside. Boots strike frozen gravel. Patton steps through the doorway, brushing snow from his coat. His scarf hangs loose, edges stiff with ice. Collins stands near the table, studying the last movements marked across the Ardennes. Patton walks in without speaking. Collins turns. Your columns reach the ridge before dawn. Collins says, they're forming a line north of the valley. Patton nods. They'll hold. Collins studies him. Storm hasn't stopped since yesterday. Patton sets his gloves on the table. Weather doesn't care. Neither do the boys. Silence settles. Papers rustle in the cold draft. A kettle clicks somewhere behind them. 2 staff officers step forward, placing fresh reports between the generals. Collins opens a top file, running a finger over the crude radio transcript. The Germans didn't expect your turn, Collins says. They're splitting their armor again. Patton glances at the map, tracing the northern arc with a blunt gesture. Then we keep pushing. Not fast, just steady. Collins folds the report and sets it aside. He looks at Patton longer than before. You shifted an entire army in the middle of the storm. Nobody in this sector saw that coming. Patton shrugs. Predictions don't win battles. Another radio crackles. An operator leans in. Message from the 4th Armored. Operator says, Collins motions him forward. The operator reads, "Advance stalled 2 miles past a ridge. Drifts blocking the pass." They request instructions. Collins looks at Patton. Patton tightens his jaw. "Tell them to start clearing the drifts by hand. All units. Nobody waits." The operator rushes out. Collins moves to the window. Snow glides through the beam of a single spotlight outside, drifting sideways like ash. He speaks without turning. The men are running on fumes. Some haven't slept in 2 days. Patton comes beside him. They know why they're still moving. Collins studies the storm. "You really believe this turn changes the ground that much?" Patton points toward the unseen horizon. "It changes them. That's enough." Collins watches him, measuring the words. A knock interrupts. A young liaison officer enters, salutes quickly, and places a folded message on the table. Collins opens it. After reading, he hands it to Patton. It's from 1st Army Headquarters. Collins says, "They adjusted the boundary again. They're giving you the corridor north." Patton lowers the paper slowly. "About damn time." Collins returns to the map. "With the corridor open, your supply convoys can move." Patton steps closer, pulling a pencil from the table. He marks a line cutting through the hills. "Then we finish it." Collins watches the pencil drag across the frozen terrain printed on the map. When Patton sets it down, Collins places a hand flat on the table, steady himself. "You know," Collins says, "when you first turned north, I thought you were pushing past the weather's limit." Patton tilts his head. "Maybe I was." "But you didn't break it," Collins says. "You bent everything else instead." Patton gives a short exhale. Not a laugh, not quite approval. Something between. Outside, a column of vehicles roars to life. Headlights pierce the snowfall, creating long tunnels of light through the dark. Collins steps away from the window. They're moving again. Patton gathers his gloves. They always do. Collins faces him fully. "I don't say this often. You force the front to shift. Not by orders, by momentum." Patton slips on his gloves. Momentum's just what with wheels under it. The 2 men stand across from each other, silent for a moment. Radios hum behind them. Scribes murmur. Boots echo in the hallway. But the room feels still. Collins finally speaks. "I'll adjust our sector again. We'll lock the flank, so your line can swing wider." Patton nods once. "Good. We make the pressure constant." A gust shakes the windows. Snow pelts the command post, rattling lightly like distant shrapnel. Collins walks back to the table. "When this storm clears," he says, "everyone will see the shape of front again, and it won't look like it did 3 days ago." Patton's eyes narrow slightly. War's a map that doesn't stay still. Someone has to redraw it. Collins studies him, really studies him, as if trying to capture a moment that will not come again. He picks up a greased pencil and circles the new northern arc. "We hold this," Collins says. "Your boys push from here. Mine anchor the side. And when the break comes, we drive straight through." Patton nods. "That's the line." Outside, more engines start. The convoy lights stretch down the road like a string of silent beacons cutting through the storm. Collins watches them move. "Your turn north," he says quietly, "was a hinge." Patton steps toward the door. "Then let's swing it open." He pulls the door wide. The wind surges in, carrying flakes across the floor. Officers at their desks lift their heads, watching him stride out into the white darkness. Collins stands alone in the open doorway for a long second, the storm pushing against him. He steps forward, letting the cold hit his face. He looks toward the moving lights, toward the dim shadows of soldiers climbing into trucks, toward the endless snow swallowing the sky. He murmurs one line, not to be heard, not to be recorded, but as a truth formed in the cold air. North was the only way. He closes the door behind him and walks back to the map, the storm fading to a muted hush outside as the front begins to shift again, mile by mile, under the weight of men who refuse to stop.